When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's what, everybody. We are back, and this is episode 220. It's fun to say. What to expect from your first job as a junior developer. So Mike is going to dive into all the things that you should be expecting. I was going to say you should be doing, but you should be expecting, which include onboarding, the difference between you doing your portfolio projects or otherwise your solo projects versus getting into a tech job, and much, much more. So if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. Now, Mike, tell us all about it. What should these people expect when they start their first developer job?
All right. So I think with this episode, what I really want to do is just set expectations, give you a little bit of insight into what it's like, because it's not as straightforward as like a regular, I want to say a regular job, but it's a little bit nuanced, and there are certain techniques you can use to kind of put yourself ahead of other people, put yourself in a position to succeed in a tech job. The journey up till the point where you get your job is difficult, and you go through a lot of, ups and downs with your interviews. You go through a lot of ups and downs with learning and just being stuck on stuff. When you get into the first job, it's a different kind of difficult. So yes, it's like, yes, you made it, but now you have to prove that you can do it. And if you've made it this far, you can definitely do it. I'm not saying that it's something that you can't accomplish, because obviously you went through the interview process. You went through all of the sample projects that you built. The job isn't that much different. But having said that, there are a lot of nuances, little things that you'll have to adjust to succeed in the work environment rather than like a solo project or a freelance environment. And that's what I want to talk about. I also want to kind of give you a day in the life that you could expect. And the other really nuanced thing, obviously, is that every company's procedure, every company's day is going to be different, right? Obviously, a different company will have a different way of doing their project management. Every company will have a different way of doing their meeting schedules and stuff like that. But overall, I think knowing the structure of someone's day will give you a little bit more insight and a little bit of a step up and into what to expect, at least, right? Now, another thing I want to mention is that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is kind of remote work related. In the office, it's a little bit different as well, but again, they do kind of correlate. And so let's just jump in and talk about onboardings, because the first thing that you kind of do when you get to work, the first day, the first week, the first month, even sometimes, might be a little bit extreme, but in the first few days, especially in the first week, you're going to be onboarded. And especially when you're going through a remote environment, there's a lot of tech that you have to be onboarded to, because you have to communicate with everyone. You have to be able to access the code that you're going to be working on. You have to be able to, check what tasks you need to work on. So there's a lot of different company tools that you're going to need access to. So that first day, I guarantee you, is going to be spent, IT giving you access, making sure you have it. A lot of the times it's going to be a little bit of a friction point where like, hey, I have access to this. There's like these SSO plugins for corporations. One's Okta, where you can kind of log into one thing and it'll log you into like 15 other things. It can kind of spiral out of control with the authentication process. So just figuring out how to log in and setting up those tools is a task in itself. And usually companies know that. So they're going to let you have that time. They're going to let you get acquainted to it. Hopefully there's some documentation. Hopefully IT is there to support you. Next thing here is most likely the next thing you're going to do after you have access and you've communicated with the team a little bit in your Slack, in your email, in your GitHub, Jira, all that. You're going to be setting up your repos. So depending on the project you're working on, you're going to get access to that code through GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab or whatever. And you're going to, clone that project locally. And hopefully there's a good README in there, and you're going to start setting up your repo. And this could be something that could take you 5 minutes, and it could be something that can take you 3 hours or a day. Who knows? Because depending on the documentation, depending on the complexity of the project, like do you have to set up the Docker environment? Do you have to set up connections to integrations? Do you have to set up multiple repos and have them communicate together and start one and start the other one separately? Like all of that is a possibility depending on the complexity of the project. And this is something I'm going to get into the difference between solo projects and tech jobs, but this is definitely something of a difference between like your own personal project and setting up a repo of an established legacy company with, 3 years of code that's been written by, 50 different people. There is a huge shift in attitude and huge shift in mindset that you need to be able to kind of set that up and not feel bad about the fact that, first of all, it might take a long time to boot up. Second of all, you might not know where everything is at any given time, especially when you're starting out. So you need to give yourself time to adapt. And again, a good onboarding process will have that built in where they're going to know you're not going to be a productive member the first day or the first 2 days because you need to get through this setup process. And maybe they're going to even have a pair programming session with you with a mentor or a senior developer to help you through that, because it can be very easy, like I said, 5 minutes, or it can be kind of a disaster. And the more technical debt, the worse it gets.
One thing I was actually going to say about all this is that, just like you were saying, how a lot of companies will have an onboarding procedure in which, if it's big, they'll have an appropriate amount of time, a set of days, maybe a week, whatever it is. Or if it's a very small setup time, maybe it's just a few hours, but it only takes a few hours. You're signing into, say, your Outlook and then your Slack or something like that. But I did want to mention that, for anyone listening who is just currently working on their own solo portfolio projects and then in the future will be looking to get hired, that this procedure and many of the things that will be mentioned in this episode happen naturally. This isn't something you need to be jotting down every single thing, being like, oh my God, like Jira. Oh, I forgot about GitHub. I forgot about this and that. A lot of this stuff is pretty, say, natural and pretty standard, where they'll literally just have a document that you follow, or they'll have a Slack bot that walks you through it, or there'll be an HR rep there that gives you a package or whatever. This isn't every company has 10 steps. Every company has 3 steps, because I've worked in a place where my spin up time, and this is actually not a joke, my spin up time was pretty well 4 months, because I was working in a completely fake environment because it was R&D. So it wasn't like I'm going into a company and there's IT handles the mail server, and IT handles the servers, and IT handles the networking, and, IT handles this, and then we only deal with the development side. I was working in a completely falsified, intentionally environment, because we're testing devices on a fake environment that's supposed to emulate a real environment. We're working at like a mini fake office. It's a lab is what it is. We're basically doing lab experiments, just with digital tools, not with chemicals and not with chemistry. So it was full on about a 3 to 4 month spin up process, and you become more productive as you go, obviously. But after the 4 months, it was sort of like, okay, you can now start taking tickets and start helping people in this and that, kind of without a lot of supervision. And even then, you still get stuck a lot because you're still a newbie. So I just wanted to mention that, because I know some people are going to be freaking out there or have super anxiety, being like, oh my God, like Slack, email, GitHub. Okay, what's next? Okay, repos. Oh, I forgot about Docker. Like a lot of that stuff is just going to be a part of the job. You might worry about signing into Outlook, but like given the task to sign into Outlook, you're not going to worry, if you will. So, don't worry about hitting all the check marks. This is more or less, and like Mike can correct me, but this is more or less so that you're prepared for an onboarding procedure, and then it'll be natural once you get there, and you'll be like, oh yeah, like email, okay, easy enough. Oh yeah, Slack, okay. GitHub, oh yeah, sure, I know Git. It'll be more natural than you think, at least in my experience.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's going to vary from company to company, and it's going to vary your level of like where you are in your career. So if you're a senior developer, there's going to be a little bit of a different expectation for a junior developer than a junior developer. So most likely, again, speaking to the junior developer audience, it's going to be a very handheld procedure. Very much like Matt's saying, there's going to be documentation. There's going to be a spin up time where there's not going to be much expected of you other than the fact that you're learning and you're kind of asking questions and you're failing. Like all of that is built in because that's part of the job. Like I know there's some companies out there that expect you to hit the ground running and start sprinting right away. I hope you don't land there. If you do, then you have to just adapt, I guess. But for the most part, if you're working for a larger tech company and you're coming in, or if you're working for a startup that knows how to hire properly, it's going to have this worked out. Like this is going to be a worked out procedure. It's nothing to kind of stress about. This is part of how you create a good environment for an employee to be successful as fast as possible by allowing them to slowly build up to that. Right?
I'd actually like to point something else out there too, though, is like, if you're saying like, you need to adapt to the company's pace, sure. But I like I've mentioned this before, is like someone in college gave me the advice. If it's bullshit in the beginning, it's going to be bullshit later on. Now that, as with everything in life, there's exceptions to that rule, of course. So maybe their internal onboarding procedure is horrible, but the whole company, the rest of it's fine. That's fine. But don't feel like you're stuck there. Maybe you're stuck there because you need to pay your bills or whatever, but know that you can go get another job. If you're working there and it's BS all the way from onboarding through your day-to-day stuff, just think to yourself, okay, I can work to get out of here. Don't feel trapped.
That's a great point. And that's a great mindset to have if you're in that situation. Like you got the first thing done. You got the job. After that, it becomes easier, right? In terms of getting another job. So just, push your way through it as much as you can, and you can level up to go to a different position if you don't like where you're currently at. Totally possible. But having said that, again, so you set up your repos. Next thing, or part of the process, will be to have a meeting, a one-on-one with like a team lead or a manager. And here's where you can ask a bunch of questions, especially with the onboarding process. You can ask a bunch of questions in terms of where the code base is heading, the longevity of the projects and stuff like that, and what you're going to be working on. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth here. This is, again, these one-on-ones are really useful, especially in a remote environment, where you can get your expectations set as well. Like, hey, my first week, what do you expect? My second week, what do you expect? Sometimes you ask these questions in an interview process as well. But in general, if you haven't, then this is a good place to do it. And, set your benchmarks, and then you understand where they're at. Then you understand what you need to do to accomplish them. And again, a lot of the times those benchmarks are going to be pretty low when you're starting out, because depending on the complexity of the code, it's going to take you some time to ramp up no matter what. In the current environment that I'm working right now, the ramp up time is probably in the 2-month to 3-month range as well, like Matt was saying. Now, you're going to get tickets before that, but those tickets are very deliberately going to be intentionally made to ramp you up. So whatever ticket you're going to be given, it's going to be very intentionally like, hey, this is something that could teach them this part of the code, and this is something that could teach them this part of the code. But in terms of like, hey, I'm going to be a general purpose programmer on this project, that's like a 2 to 3 month ramp up. And it gets, as projects will get more complex, the ramp up gets higher and higher. So it's okay to take that time. After that, you're probably going to be told to read and update documentation. This is a very common first task, potential pull request, even something like that, because a great way to determine if your onboarding process is right is if the person can go through the documentation, spin up the project, and have everything go well and smooth. And the chances of that happening are usually pretty slim because everyone interprets stuff differently. So a great thing to do for a manager is to get, hey, can you go through the documentation, make sure that you can ramp yourself up. If there's any questions, ask them, and then update the documentation. Right. So that allows the person to go through the code, to go through the documentation, to start, setting up the project locally on their machine, and to make sure that the documentation is updated. it's not the most glamorous of tasks, but it's a very useful one. So don't think that, hey, they're just getting busy work. No, this is work that's very important to the team. So treat it like that as well. Next thing here would be to solve your first issue and submit your first pull request. This might happen fairly quickly in the process. I know I like to get people going on their first pull request fairly quickly. Again, it's going to be a very intentionally designed task to get you started with the code. And just to clarify, pull request, what I mean by that is essentially in Git, when you create a branch, for instance, to work on a feature, if you want to get that branch merged back in and combined into dev, you create something called a pull request. And a pull request is usually designed for a code review so that someone can, a manager or like a team lead or another developer on the team can go in and make sure that your structure is correct. They can pull down your repo and run it locally to make sure everything is running correctly, give you comments and feedback. And then if everything goes well, they can accept it and merge it into dev or master or main, however you manage your repository. And yeah, so that's going to be kind of your onboarding, your ramp up in the company. And I'm sure as you're going through there, you're probably going to end up hitting your first stand up. So a stand up meeting is it's either a daily or like a couple of times a week, however the company does it. It's a meeting where you kind of get together with the development team and you discuss your tasks. So usually it's like, what are you working on now? Is there anything blocking you? Is there anything stopping you from accomplishing those tasks? That can be anything from, hey, I'm just waiting on designs from my designer, or I need to talk to this company to integrate with, or I'm waiting for this other developer to finish their project, right? Anything that's blocking you. And then what are you going to be working on next once you finish those tasks? So it's usually a quick meeting, 15 to 30 minutes, hopefully. And it's a way to make sure that everyone's kind of on track and no one is blocked. It is in an async work environment or in a remote environment. A lot of times stand-ups can be done through text. And I kind of prefer it that way. I still prefer meetings sometimes, like once a week or something like that. But through text, you can kind of achieve all of this, just, typing out the tasks that you're working on and what needs to be done. And then you have a historical record as well, which is kind of convenient to follow. Be like, okay, this person's working on this. This is what's blocked, rather than a visual one. But depending on how the company handles it.
I had a question here, actually. So I know we mentioned like setting up your company tools, like your Slack and all that, getting your repos in there, having your one-on-one with your manager, read and update documentation, all that, and then solve your first issue. But how do you get your set of tasks so that you could solve your first issue and be able to participate in that first stand-up as well? Where do the tasks come from? Where should you expect that is that from your one-on-one with your manager / your team lead, or what is that? Like, where do those come from?
Good question. I think it can come from many different places. It can come from the stand-up. It can come from the sprint planning meeting. A lot of times tasks will be split up. So a sprint plan, if you have a 1-week sprint or a 2-week sprint, will happen once a week or once every 2 weeks, where you kind of go through the backlog, choose what you're going to be doing for the sprint, and you assign it to people to do that task. Now, if you joined in the middle of the week or something, you'll probably be assigned a task one-on-one with your manager, or during a stand-up, be like, hey, this is a perfect task for you to just kind of get yourself familiar with the code. Can you please take a look at it? Ask a million questions, please. Like, that's usually how I handle it. Ask as many questions as possible. And then the manager should also check in with you during the day, not to see where you're at with the task, but to make sure that you're not afraid to ask a question.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, there's many different ways it can come in. There's automated processes. I mean, like, you can have, if you have Jira, you can just get tasks assigned to you in an automated way. And in an async work environment, that happens a lot, where you just have like a manager assign tasks and no one even talks to each other. And that's fine for someone that is okay with the code base and is a seasoned developer in the code base. In my opinion, that's not a great way to start off for a new junior developer. So
because
hopefully
it depends on what they're
the
touching,
case.
right? It's like, imagine being given something that touches the database and the front end and maybe even the server in some capacity. Be like, holy, like I'm touching 3 expertise worth of stuff for this first task. Like, that's not good.
Yeah, exactly. And like, even contextually, like, let's say you're giving a really easy task that only touches one of those things, having no one to have told you about that task to give you background on why you're doing it is intimidating, at least in my opinion. Again, maybe there's junior developers out there that can hit the ground running and just go into the code base without having any conversations. But I think it is important when you're onboarding someone that you have those times where you can meet with them in person on Zoom or whatever and describe the tasks that you're going to be giving them initially. After that, once they get the ball rolling, it's okay. Async, it works, right? But at least in the onboarding process, I highly recommend having a little bit of a personal touch on it. Okay, so yeah, that's usually the onboarding process. I probably missed a bunch of things as well, but that's kind of how I see it. Let's go into the next segment here, which is differences between your solo projects, so your sample projects that you worked on, and the actual job, right? So there's a lot of these, but the first and probably biggest difference would be meetings. So on your solo projects, you're meeting with yourself. If it's a freelance project, you're meeting with a client every once in a while. In a tech job, meetings become part of your routine. Now, there's like this, anti-meeting stuff going on right now, and that's good because meetings were getting out of hand, and they still kind of are. But the reality is, if you have a business portion of the company and marketing portion of the company and a tech portion of the company, they need to somehow communicate in a way that makes for a good product together, right? So a lot of times there will be something in the middle there where there will be like tech leads and engineering managers that will handle a lot of that communication between business and marketing, but they're going to need to pass that down effectively to you to be able to complete your tasks because you need to know a bigger picture of what you're working on, right? So that's where these meetings come in. You'll be assigned to a stand-up, like I was saying, that's a meeting. You'll be assigned to sprint retrospectives. So all the Scrum stuff, you'll be assigned to the basic project management meetings. But you're also probably going to be assigned to like, hey, we're optimizing the site speed and we need the marketing person, we need the design person in here, and we need this. So you might be there with like a few different types of employees where you're going to need to discuss, hey, from a development perspective, I can, make sure that we load less JavaScript here. From a marketing perspective, we can have less analytics here. From a design perspective, we can make images smaller here or less images on this page. So you need multiple different aspects of a company to be able to make some decisions and to be able to move a project forward. And that's where these meetings kind of come in. That's where these task forces come in. That's where these stuff like that. So you are going to have those meetings. Just be prepared for them. It's nothing special. It's very typical to how you would have like a project meeting in school, right? Nothing too crazy. Just expect that you're not just going to be sitting at your desk working on code all the time.
Well, the thing with all this too, the anti-meeting thing, is that there does come a point where a lot of the non-coding part of the company, if you do have those two separate segments of the company that Mike had already mentioned, they primarily kind of function on really communication and meetings. Like that's their way of communicating. That's their way of going through things. And they are constantly brainstorming and this and that. And then the technical side, and then some other stuff too, like the graphical design and stuff like that. That's where, say, the actual like quote unquote work is being done. And they're playing like a support role. So like you're making the app and then they're marketing the app. So they got to know where it's at, this and that. So you're working cooperatively, but there is a line of contention, if you will, where they are meeting happy because that's literally what they're supposed to be doing. And then they're trying to go into a section of the company in which is not meeting happy. And so this is why there's this anti-meeting thing, because imagine being given a ticket, you have 3 days left, and then you wake up, you're in meetings from 8 to 4, and then it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm working from 4 till 11, unpaid effectively, assuming you're only paid for 8 hours. I guess I'm working from 4 to 11 on my code, only to then wake up again to go have a meeting at 8 a.m. And this is these are more or less horror stories, but these are things that happen. We've discussed productivity in the past and deep work hours and all this type of stuff, but having, let's say, a meeting and then 2 hours and then another meeting, you're not really probably going to get too much done in those 2 hours. there's no like deep work section. There's no time to really focus on it. And I'm not one to necessarily subscribe a lot to like, oh, I need my 2 deep work hours and this and that. I don't manage it that much, but it is something that happens naturally where there are times where, say, a deadline's coming up and I'm like, okay, I need this done. And then I just sit down and I just, bang it out. But if I was constantly called all the time during that, really what it is deep work, period. If I was constantly called during that, or if I even had a call coming up really soon, within a few hours, couple hours, my brain's half in my work and then half into the meeting thinking, okay, I got to make sure I'm there. I got to have a drink ready. I got to be, whatever races through your head. And so this is why this anti-meeting thing is happening. So hopefully you don't get into a company that is meeting happy, but, we'll see what happens. I would say the anti-meeting thing is in the same stage roughly as the 4-day work week, where the 4-day work week is starting to sort of take off. The anti-meeting stuff is starting to take off. Maybe it's a little more ahead because meetings have been around for a long time now. But, I guess my whole point with this is just, you're going to enter into one culture or the other, or one in the middle where they have maybe sometimes a little bit too much meetings, but sometimes not that much. But just don't get mad necessarily at the other department is, I guess, my ultimate thing, because it is a line of contention. They need to know what's going on and you don't want to tell them. So just, that sometimes you got to ignore them for a little bit and do your deep work. Like I'll just shut my phone off and that's it. And I'll do my deep work. And even if I miss some sort of critical ticket, it's like, yeah, but I'm still coming out at the end of the day with my task done. I built my whole footer like I was told to. And I'm coming out with a result. I'm not sitting there being like, oh, that needs to be checked. Oh, I gotta do that. Oh, the header now. Oh, like, hang on. Oh, this person needs help. Oh, wait, we need to schedule a meeting. Wait, oh, someone needs to reschedule a meeting. Like, it's too much all over the place. So it is a contention point from both sides of the fence. So just remember that you're trying to work cooperatively and try to be civil, but even though it is a point of contention.
Yeah, exactly. And a big tip that I have for this kind of stuff is everyone kind of looks at your calendar, especially business people. Trust me on this. Your calendar is like the most important part of a business minded person's connection with you, because when they go to make these meetings, they'll use something like Google Calendar or Microsoft Office, whatever, which have the ability to see what your calendar is looking like. So when they add you to the meeting, you can see all your meetings that day. So if you need to get that footer done, like Matt is talking about, and that's part of your job, that is your job, you're a developer, then you have to block off that time on the calendar, right? Block off 3 hours so that someone from the business side knows, hey, I can't book them in this time because they're going to be working. That's a very typical way to handle that situation, Matt. Whether the business side will respect it or not is a question, but a lot of times that is a really important thing, a really important separation to make to actually get some productivity done, because your time costs a lot of money and companies know that. So they try to limit meetings, but if you have 15 different departments, that communication starts to kind of overlap all the time and it just becomes a disaster.
Well, the thing is, too, is they could be doing stand-ups of their own, whether or not they're on the Scrum system or not, those other departments or something similar, but they could be having a stand-up or an equivalent to a stand-up, and you might be their blocker.
Yes.
They might say, hey, I'm done my poster, that we're going to be posting on some sort of Facebook ad, but I need this developer to tell me how far he is along so I can put out a date. Like, are we Q1, Q2? When's our deliverable? And you could be their blocker. And so you kind of think about it in that way where like they're going to be bugging you, but you're trying to get the work done. It is a bit of push and pull, but you're 100% right in that work or the, time is money when you're at work. Absolutely. And so, there is a happy balance, but it's hard to strike it. It's hard to get it right.
Yep. And it's never going to be perfect. So just accept that and kind of, adapt, like Matt said. Okay, so next thing here, the differences is code reviews. Obviously, if you're working on a solo project, you're not going to have too many eyes on your code. So you can write whatever the heck you want. It works great. In a company, a lot of times there will be people looking at your code to make sure that it conforms to the company's guide, to the company's coding style, to the company's linting process, to the company's the company's way of doing certain things. Now, it might be rigid. It might be loose. There's many different variations in between, right? So sometimes they don't care. They'll just take a look to make sure that you're not breaking anything and move it along. And other times they'll be extremely rigid and say that you have to use arrow functions instead of regular function calls. And that's it. Like no in between. You have to do that. This is where you need to learn the system. You can't, as a junior developer, come in and change the entire, structure of a code. It's not going to work. You can suggest things. There's nothing wrong with that. Being like, hey, I learned this kind of style. Do you want to take a look at it? But expect that to get shot down sometimes and move on. So this is a very big difference that you have to adapt to, because it is a very, it's just a shocking thing where hey, I wrote this, I declared this variable one way. It works perfectly fine, but the company declares variables in a different way. And, you might have to change that. So think of it as a way to grow into learning different systems rather than a hindrance to your coding process. I think just shifting that mindset a little bit, because having other developers that have more years of experience than you look at your code and come up with ways to efficiently write certain things, like taking your, 5 if statements and breaking it down into one, is a very huge way to level up your coding skills. And you should use that to the biggest advantage, because when you're learning, I know it's great that, hey, no one's critiquing me, but really you want that critiquing. And if you want a mentorship program, sometimes you have to pay a lot of money for that. Well, it's built into a job a lot of the time. So take advantage of it. Next thing here is legacy code. This is a big one and something that will take some time to adapt to. But usually when you're coming into a project, if you're not being thrown onto a completely new project, you're going to be dealing with legacy code. And this could be, just old code that was written 3 years ago. This could be a small package that was written over here for 3 years ago to connect with some database. This could be your entire project was written, 2 years ago by a completely different team, and you have to adapt to it. Reading code, figuring out what's going on in code, debugging code. This is going to become a very big part of your job. That's the reality of it. Sometimes it's not fun because all of a sudden, you were used to React with hooks, but this company hasn't updated to hooks. They're still using classes, and they can't update their React package because of some other package, some other dependency that relies on the old package. It just becomes a mess a lot of the times. And yes, they're always going to say oh, we're looking at updating it, but don't rely on that. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to learn the older system. You're going to have to learn how it works. The best way to do that is to just read the code that's already been written and adapt to it. So just if you're building a footer, there's probably already a footer before. See how it was built and take that and put in your own styling, whatever you have to do to that footer, and build it out with the same kind of structure. It's not that it's really difficult. It's just the mindset shift from, hey, I get to write whatever I want, to having to stick to kind of older technologies or stuff that's kind of a little bit janky. It gets a little bit annoying, and you're going to complain about it, and that's fine. But on the other hand, you got to do it. You got to get through it, and you have to be able to contribute even to a legacy project. Next thing here is integrations. Another big one. A lot of times, again, you're building your solo project. You might have a database that you built yourself. You might have an authorization system in the back end that you built, something like that. But at the end of the day, you're probably not going to have a massive CRM that needs to, track all your information, all your orders. You're not going to have 10 different analytics platforms that the business, the CEOs, the VPs, the 15 different departments need to track. You're not going to have the inventory management systems. You're not going to have the internal tools for internal authentication. There's just integrations become a very big blocker for a lot of things, and probably one of your biggest challenges as you start kind of ramping up in the code base. Because when someone comes and says, hey, we need this feature, I need you to have this button pressed so that we can navigate to this page. It's not just, hey, I'm just going to put a link here. No, well, every time someone clicks on it, we need, this tracker to be there. We need this tracker to be there. Well, now it's slow. Why is it slow? Well, you have 15 trackers on it. Well, that's not my problem. Like, you have to kind of efficiently load them. And it just goes into this rabbit hole with a button click. And I don't mean to scare anyone about it. I just want to be very clear that part of your job will be to figure out the more complex stuff that you weren't really thinking about in a sample project. And these integrations have that complexity to them because some of them might be old, some of them might be new. Just making them work together isn't a whole other issue. And when you're looking at a code base that's been worked on for a long time, you're going to just see a bunch of code that just, it looks out of place. And a lot of that is like an adapter to an integration or a old piece of legacy code that makes it so that you can communicate with this old database, like a mainframe or something like that, like some crazy stuff. So that's where that kind of technical debt comes in. And that's where a lot of the complexity in a seemingly simple project can lead you down rabbit holes to kind of build out very complex systems.
I actually want to mention something here where if you think about this as a single task, and we mentioned this before, taking a large task, breaking it down. If we think about this as like a one task where, sure, it's one button click. There's your task. But Mike said, there's 4 trackers on it for whatever reason. It's anxiety inducing and it's worrying because you didn't think about this when your solo projects. You didn't do this in your portfolio projects, and you're thinking like, oh my God, what do I do? Because at least to me, the very first thing that my mind goes to is I need to do this. I'm on the clock. I need to do this right now. What do? I don't know how to do it. But the thing is if you break this down into the separate tasks, and this is key for me, approach it from the mindset of if I were doing this in my project, I wouldn't be worried about it. I would just go and beat it up. I would just beat that task up. I'd figure out how to do it, hit my head off the wall a couple of times, figuratively, and I would just try to figure this out, throw the book at it, try all the solutions, this and that. And if you do that approach on a small task and you finish it, then you go to the next small task, the next small task, the next small task, and now your button just works. To me, anyway, that's a way easier way for me to personally approach it rather than sitting there, mind racing, freaking out. Oh my God, like, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. This isn't a test at school where you can't refer to things. If you were told tomorrow that you had to, change, like, you and only you can have to change the roof on your house. I mean, yeah, it's going to be a little anxiety inducing, but you're going to be able to like look things up and do whatever. And then you're going to attack it and you're going to do it. It might not be amazing, but you're going to attack it, try it and see what happens. The big thing with a lot of web development stuff is a lot of the stuff, not everything, but a lot of the stuff is obviously working or obviously not. If you have a button that is supposed to send a signal to Google Tags, that Google Tag Manager, and all it does is track how many times this thing was clicked. And you click on that button and it does work. It does send the Google Tag Manager, but it doesn't send the user to the page they clicked on. That's super obvious. Same with the other side. If you click it and the user does get to the next page, but it doesn't trigger Google Tag Manager, it doesn't track that click, super obvious. So, this isn't like some really complex thing where it's like, what are the side effects of this? Sure, some big code bases, you're going to have some weird side effects down the road or whatever, like what have you. But in general, if you approach these problems in the standard, take the big task, break it into small ones, but then just think of it as, I'm just going to tackle this task. Because all you at the end of the day can do is just do what you normally would do. I mean, if you can't solve it, you can't solve it. Like, what's going to happen to you? And chances are, if you were doing when you were doing your personal solo projects, chances are you had a bunch of things that you did not know how to do, but you really wanted a slider in this particular location, but you did not know how that slider worked, or you wanted a slider and you wanted to make it yourself. You didn't want to use any plugins or anything, and you went in and you just did it. And so if you approach it with that sort of mindset of, this is just a task I need to do, I'm just going to try to go and figure it out, rather than, oh my God, I'm at work, I don't know what to do, what am I supposed to do? Help. I think like that'll help a lot. Also, one other thing as well is, so we used to have at work, database architects. I'm sure I annoyed them, but oh well. If I had database problems, I went and I talked to the database architects because that was their job. And I would spend 2 weeks trying to figure out what some value was or why some value was corrupt or that weird string. Is that corrupt or is that some sort of ID number? Like, I don't know. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it isn't. So I just go talk to them. Yeah, sure. Maybe they got annoyed with me here and there. I wouldn't go there every day and every 5 minutes. Certainly not. And I would try to gather a few questions and go ask. But that's what I would do, as I would just go to the database architect and be like, hey, I don't know. Like, I'm bumping up against your expertise. Help. So, if possible, use that as well as a help for your own sanity. Because there's a reason why there's database architects, or there's a reason why there's sysadmins or whatever. Because you're all working together, and sometimes you step over the line and you're, oh my God, I got to set up this server. What do I do? Well, maybe you're not supposed to be doing that and you're overthinking the problem. Or maybe you are supposed to be doing that, but it's really simple, the change that you need to do, and you're overthinking it. It's not your expertise, and that guy knows the answer right away. So just a couple of pointers for stuff when you're given things that are completely new to you, stuff that you've never considered even in your solo projects.
100%. And yeah, asking questions is a huge, huge part of what you're going to be doing when you first start out, and even further down the line, because as you get into more complex tasks, you're going to have more complex questions. Always don't hesitate to ask. Make sure that you're not repeating questions too often, but don't hesitate to go out there and ask a question. That's really important. I'll talk about a little bit in the tips and why that's important, but really, like, ask questions. 100%. Next thing here, testing. So maybe you did some testing in your solo projects just for getting the experience with it. I know a lot of people recommend you to do that, but for me, myself, like, I almost never write tests for my, sample apps or something like that, or my portfolio projects, because it's just not that important. But in a large, massive, like, tech, in a company where you have stuff going to deploying stuff where customers will be accessing it, thousands of customers, potentially millions of customers. And when you deploy it, you need to know that, hey, this workflow works, and you don't have 1,000 QA engineers going through and hammering your site. You need to write tests. That's just the reality of it. Depending on what company, depending on what project, it's going to be different amounts of tests, whether you need to do unit tests and end-to-end tests. That's a question depending on what kind of company you're at, but know that you're probably going to be writing some tests. And usually if it's a integrated feature, I'm going to say if it's a feature relating to payment or checkout or anything to do with, like, e-commerce, let's say, you're going to be spending just as much time as you are coding the feature as you do writing the tests for it. It's almost a 50-50 split. So don't be afraid that it's taking you a long time to write the test, because it's intentionally taking you a long time. It's just complicated. That's just the reality of it. It's okay. It should be built in. If they want tests written, they're going to have to pay for tests being written. That's kind of how I put it. And it's not super complicated. It's not hard to do. It's more time consuming than anything. But it is important for the code base to be able to be tested on, like, a deployment, and be able to be tested on performance optimizations and stuff like that. So just accept that this is probably going to be part of your job.
I had a question. So all my testing in the past, I mean, short of me obviously testing people's websites out, but all my testing in sort of, I guess, this level that we're talking at, this level of corporation, were hardware tests, like testing, like, phones, or testing, whatever, modems or whatever. So what do you mean by testing in this instance? So you're saying writing tests. So to me, that means literally going into Microsoft Word and writing in, like, we need a test case in which the user goes here, clicks this button, goes here, backs out 3 times, changes the quantity. We need tests that are really straightforward. Can the user add quantity? Sure. But then we need another test that's really crazy. Like, the user keeps adding and removing quantity, and we need to make sure the system adapts to that. Is that what you mean? Or do you mean literally programming in, like, a bot or something to do the test? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. So both, so programming in a bot to do the test. Okay. So an end-to-end test, for example, let's say you have an e-commerce site, an end-to-end test would do this. It would load a page. So that's part of the bot process. Then on the page, try to detect something that should be there, like the title of one of your products. Then you would use that title to find the add to cart button. The bot would press the button. Then it would open the side cart, right, automatically. And then the bot would click the checkout button, then go to the checkout page, then fill in the checkout information, then hit the place order button and see what happens. And it would be at every step, it would be detecting something on the page that should be there. And that would be the check mark. So is the price correct? And you would compare it manually. So you would type in the price that you expect into the bot. And if it doesn't correlate, then the test would fail and it would send you a notification. They also create screenshots. They also create videos. Like, these tests are very sophisticated, but you have to program them, right? But it's almost like a person is going through it. It runs a headless version of Chrome. So it literally spins up a headless version of Chrome in the background and it automatically does all these actions. So there's also something called unit tests, which are a little bit smaller, where you literally are detecting, hey, is this component, you're giving the component some information, and is this component displaying the proper information? Those ones are less robots and more just, hey, does this exist? And that's it.
Sorry, so a question again then. So you're saying it opens up this headless version of Chrome. Are you using a plugin to create specific tests? Are these called I don't know, Bill's test or something? What is this? Is this when you were first talking, I thought you would go into, how you validate a form. You're effectively checking the form to see if the user has entered the right thing. You could take the same kind of idea and check to make sure that give the robot or give the JavaScript and say the total should be $13 bang on. And then and if it isn't, then give me a console log and says, hey, the total is actually $12.60. That's bad, or whatever. Is that what you're doing? Or are you actually using a specific plugin for some sort of framework that's a bot for testing?
Yeah, specific plugins like Cypress, Playwright, Mocha, Jest, all of those plugins, all those random words that I just said, they're all just plugins for testing different things.
Okay.
Yeah, they do all that for you. They're the ones that create the headless instance of Chrome. They're the ones that run through everything. You write in essentially their syntax as well. So they have their own kind of JavaScript programming syntax. You're not learning a whole new language, but you need to know how their HTML structure works and stuff like that. How do they crawl the HTML? How do they get it? But it's all documented, obviously. Again, it's not hard. It's just tedious, really, at the end of the day, because you have to go in and write all these manually. You have to write what it needs to expect. Sometimes you have to give it an entire fake API to push in. So it needs to check if your component, your headless component, can interact with Stripe, or it can PayPal or whatever. You have to make a fake PayPal API payload and put it in there. So again, it's annoying and tedious, but yes, there are tons of tools out there to help you do that. It's just part of the process.
On a personal note, I don't code at this level, and every time we talk about this, there's a new big thing, and it pushes me further and further away. I had no idea this existed. Now there's a whole new syntax, a whole new thing you got to do. Great.
It's one of those things you got to do, but it's built into part of the process. It's not, you have to learn this whole platform or whatever. It's nothing, I don't know. It's
so if I don't know it, will I know it tomorrow? If I started studying right now, I'll know it tomorrow. Or how complex is this?
I think at a basic level, you would be able to write a test tomorrow without too much of an issue. Yes.
Interesting.
It's not that hard. It's honestly not that hard. Obviously, the more complex your project is, the more complex your tests have to be. But to make a basic test to test how a button works is not you could do that tomorrow, no problem.
I would like to know why we have never heard of this before, or I have never heard of this before. I've heard of all the different parts of React and this and that, and Shadow DOMs and every other thing. And I don't code in React, but it's I've heard all about all these different parts. And this is the first time I'm ever hearing about this. How did something this seemingly large slip through the cracks? And the reason why I'm asking this is for my own understanding, but also, are the people doing solo projects even aware of this?
Well, if you're not aware of it, I'm sure there's tons of people that aren't aware of it either. So it's good that we brought it up. It's good that you dove in. Why you haven't heard of it is because you just have not needed it.
Sure.
You have,
but,
yeah, that's
I haven't needed a Shadow DOM, either.
You don't hear about it. Well, that, again, most of the stuff that we talk about, I go through and only look into when I need it. Like, I don't do testing on my personal projects. I know some people will hate me for that or whatever. I don't care. But like, I don't do testing on my personal projects. But for a corporation, again, as soon as you're talking, hey, one day of being out of service is X amount of dollars, that's where testing comes in. That's where you need that overhead. Okay. So like, that's why you haven't done it. Like that's why you haven't heard about it. You haven't needed it.
That's still wild. Like it's such a like, I always like to be proactive, and it's such a reactive way of thinking that I need to do that, but it's still wild, like, to me, that I've never heard of this. Like, I know what testing is. Obviously, I test the websites I put together and do like test purchases and stuff, but I'm also making like WordPress sites and stuff like that for people.
Yeah, there's also different testing methodologies and stuff like that. I don't know everything about it. I'm not that good at it. I'll be frank with that. Like, I'm not a good test writer. But I do it, and it's nothing special. Like, there's nothing special about it. It's not like learning a new framework or anything like that. It's a little bit simpler than that. And a lot of the times, again, if you're entering into a new project, there probably is going to be a lot of tests already written. So your job will be to read those tests and copy paste a lot of the code from them and just change out some words. That's most of the time, that's literally all you're doing. Copy pasting and changing out a few words. Okay. Next thing here is office politics. This one is kind of obvious for any job. Like, it doesn't have to be a tech job, but this is something you have to adapt to. So if it's your first job in the industry or in any industry, you're going to have to play some games sometimes. Now, I'm not talking like games as in, video games or other games. I'm talking like, hey, this person's having a bad day, or this person's being kind of an asshole or something like that. Maybe I should back off. Maybe I should confront them about it. This person's reporting me to HR for whatever reason. Now I have to, like, these kinds of weird social games that you wouldn't play at, obviously, when you're working as a freelancer or on your own, that you have to now take into account. You have to take into account who's on your team. How do they react to criticism? How does your boss handle, questions being asked? Like, all of this stuff. You can't just treat everyone exactly the same and expect to have a good relationship with everyone. Sometimes you're going to have some friction, and you have to be okay with that. Next thing here is split responsibilities. So this is different. Again, when you have a team of people working on a project, you might have a designer, you might have a UX designer, you might have an engineer that focuses solely on integrations, like APIs integrations. You might have a front-end developer that only does layouts. You might have a front-end web developer that only does integration with their CMS or something like that. Like, there might be specialties on your team, right? So there's these split responsibilities that get assigned, and we all have to communicate. So if you're working on a component that integrates with the integration engineer, then you need to communicate with the integration engineer. You need to have a process set up between the two of you so that you can provide like the structure of the code, and he can then wire up the CMS, for instance, something like that. There's a little bit more nuance to that. Every team handles it differently. Some teams like to do it more siloed, where if you're working on a feature, you have to handle all of the features, code structure, including the integration, including the layouts and stuff like that. But depending on who you're working for, what kind of company it is, it might be different. So ideally, you want to work on a small team. You want to handle as much as possible to learn as much as you can, but that's not reality for everyone. Okay. Next thing that I want to talk about is a day in the life. So I just want to kind of give you a quick overview in what I do on a typical work day. This is not every day, but I just took like yesterday as an example. So usually after waking up and just having like a coffee, I'll check my Slack and emails really quickly, make sure there's nothing urgent, like the site's not down, and answer anything that needs to be answered at that time. Then I'll go into Jira. I'll check my tasks, make sure that no one's tagged me in Jira, because in Jira, if you haven't used it yet, you can kind of tag each other in a different task. So if someone needs something from you, if someone's blocked, whatever, they might contact you through Jira. They might contact you through Slack. They might contact you through email. So I think the splitting of communication has become a little bit extreme. But hopefully your company doesn't have another task management software like Rike or whatever that you have to also check. Cause I've heard of that happening where you have to be literally checking like 5 different pieces of software to figure out where someone has contacted you from what. And that can get kind of crazy. But again, that's part of the day, part of random jobs. Nothing is ever 100% efficient.
Bring on the chat apps. More chat apps. I want more disparity. Even on my personal phone, I'm like, I need to message this person. Where do I message them? Messenger? SMS? RCS? WhatsApp? Where is it? Where are they? Something just dinged? I don't even know what it's from. Like, it's just like Discord, Zoom. Where is it? More, please. I need more notifications, more updates, and more things that could potentially break. Papa John's. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. Like it's some teams manage it better than others, whatever. Okay. Just accept it and move on. After I check Jira, I'll usually just set up my development environment because while I'm checking Jira, I check which task I'm going to be working on, or I just check my notes from the day before. Sometimes I write notes for myself and be like, hey, these are the 3 tasks that I want to finish in the morning or next day or something like that. I'll set up my development environment for those tasks and then I'll take a break. So I'll kind of step away, maybe do some exercise, go finish my coffee somewhere. I'll just relax for a bit because I like to kind of split up my communication time and my setup time with my deep work time. I think it helps me transition into deep work a little bit faster. And again, finding your routine and finding the way that you can get to a deep work state or get to a working state faster is going to be key. A lot of your work is going to demand you really to concentrate on code, really to get stuff done. So you need to make sure that you can be effective. Because if you're not, and this happens to me all the time where I have just bad days, then I find myself working till like 7 or 8. And it's not like the company's forcing me to do that. It's just like my own mental thing where I'm just like, well, I took a bunch of breaks. I couldn't focus here. So I'm just doing this. And it's annoying because again, some companies will not force you, or most companies won't force you to do that. But depending if you have the same mental model as me, you might feel bad or something for whatever reason and force yourself to work longer. So it's better to get stuff done as quickly as possible and be able to sign off as quickly as possible rather than just stretching your day with a bunch of nonsense and YouTube videos and whatever distractions. So after I take that break, I will start working. So depending on my kind of mood, depending on my motivation that day, I'll either hit a deep work task, so like a complicated task. So if I'm ready to go and I'm like, okay, I know how to do this, I know where to go, I'll do that. If I feel like I need that motivation, if feel like I need to get the ball rolling, I'll usually find a smaller task just to get it done and kind of move on from there and let a snowball effect a little bit come in. So it's not one or the other, is both. Like I'll use both depending on the day. Then I'll usually, once I finish a task, so usually 2 to 3 hours of time, I'll have some breakfast. And I do a late breakfast, so that's why it's later in the day. I'll have some breakfast and then I'll go to the stand-up. So stand-up meeting for us right now, it happens 3 times a week. And it's usually around 15, 20 minutes. And we just, give our updates for the day and make sure that no one's blocked. It's very standard stand-up meeting. After the stand-up, usually might be some other meetings that happen because sometimes there's a blocker. Usually a blocker will cause another meeting or at least a conversation. Sometimes you schedule meetings right after your stand-up because you're already in a meeting. So it's better to kind of, group them all together. Like Matt said a little bit earlier, if you have like meeting 2 hours meeting, that 2 hours becomes really useless. And that's 100% true. That for me, especially, like in that 2 hours, I'll just be thinking about that other meeting or thinking about the meeting before it. So I kind of like to group my meetings together as much as possible. Doesn't work all the time, but whatever. If I don't have any meetings, I'll just go back to coding. Then code for a few hours, lunch, and then some more meetings, right? Or coding. So depending on the day, I'll have maybe at most I'll have 3 meetings. I like those days kind of suck for me. I really don't like it, but it's fairly okay right now.
Sometimes I'll have days where I have no meetings. Today is one of those days, in fact, where I literally have no stand up, no meetings. I could just work all day. I did book off time to work though, so that no meetings could be scheduled because I do have a feature that needs to be done for tomorrow. And when someone contacts me why I have it booked off, that doesn't happen very often. But if someone does, that's my explanation. It's not a big deal. And I usually end the day with Jira. So I'll open up Slack in Jira, make sure that all the questions that I have that have been asked me are answered. Any questions that I need for tomorrow, I'll ask. And I will make sure that my tasks are updated. So one thing that I want to mention with Jira is you want to make sure that you're updating the status in there. It's important for kind of the project management perspective and for your own backward, like for legacy code's sake, because if you're working on, for instance, the footer and, you explain what goes wrong with the task, what you needed, the next time you have to do an update to the footer, you can go back to the Jira task. And if it's linked correctly, you can kind of avoid those mistakes. Or if there's ever any issue with the footer, we can see who did that footer and ask them directly, because it just makes it a lot easier it's not about like accountability. It's more about quickly getting to the solution, right? So it's important to kind of update those tasks, make sure that everyone's on the same page. And then I sign off. And usually I sign off, I close my Slack and I don't look at it for the rest of the day. I do have a notification set that if I get mentioned a couple times, it will notify me. So like if there's an emergency, someone will mention me a couple times, I can jump back on, but it doesn't happen very often. And that's it. That's my day in the life. It's nothing glamorous, but I figured it'd be interesting or at least important for people to understand that it is just a normal day. And if you know what it looks like, it might not be as scary to dive into. Last thing here is I just want to say a few tips and tricks to kind of stand out and make it so that your first, few weeks, few months, first year in the industry is super beneficial for you, right? I think first tip right here is stepping outside of your comfort zone. So let's say you were always a, HTML, CSS, React dev, and the company that you're working on has now switched to Vue. Don't be afraid to make those kinds of shifts. It's not a good idea to be stuck in kind of your ways, especially early on in your career, because the more you kind of take on that you don't know, the faster you'll learn. And the faster you'll grow as a developer. The web development in general requires knowledge from a million different areas. And until you have that mindset of, hey, I'm okay with struggling a little bit here, I'm okay with learning this new technology, it's going to be very difficult for you to progress in your career. Because what one company does, what one company's tech stack is almost never one-to-one with another company's tech stack, no matter how you put it together. Just different tech leads, different legacy code. You're always going to be learning something new. So it's better to just embrace it, be okay with struggling, ask questions, watch videos. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to know it to be able to take that task. Obviously, you have to have some basis in reality. Like you can't, from a web developer, you can't all of a sudden take on a machine learning task unless you're a genius or something like that. Like that's probably not going to be a good idea. But if it's in the same realm, you can do it. And you'll struggle, but it's okay.
What do you think about people so they'll try to learn stuff on their own time? Now, obviously, that's pretty normal, especially if you code for a living and code for a hobby, let's say, for example. But what do you think about if someone is, let's say you're working on the tech stack let's just say React for the sake of just this audio. So you're working with React and they want to move over to Vue, and the company is not giving you any time to spin up in Vue. They just want you to one day be in React, and then you're switching teams to some other project, say, and you're in Vue. So you'll be basically forced to do it on your own time. Is that acceptable, unacceptable? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, this is a tough one, but honestly, my take is when you're a junior developer, you're probably going to have to learn on your own time. It's just part of the job. And It's unfortunate, maybe not. But it is. You're going to have to take, like, especially when you take on these tasks that are outside your comfort zone, you're going to have to ramp up in them in some degree. And you can do that on the job, right? Like, you can learn on the job. That's not an issue. But for the most part, in your own mindset, there's going to be this blocker where you're like, well, I can just do a little bit more and I can learn a little bit more here and I can get by a little bit faster. The first, 2 years or year of your job is all about that progression. You're probably not going to be getting the craziest salary. Like, you're not going to be getting these high six figure ranges on your first junior developer job. That's not the reality. The idea is to get there as fast as possible. And really the only way to do that is to, again, step outside your comfort zone and put in some extra time after work, right? This isn't a typical job that usually you can just disconnect from. Later on in your career, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years down the line, that's probably a possibility, right? Like, when you're an established developer working for a company and you have your role set, yeah, maybe you can, for the most part, you can disconnect every day and have that perfect work-life balance. But when you're first starting out, there's just so much to learn. It's the unfortunate reality that you're probably going to have to put in that extra effort. You're going to have to break your work-life balance a little bit. I'm not saying every day. Don't do this every day, right? But few days a week, you might have to put in some extra time to level up your skills.
This kind of goes weirdly against the image that's shown off on Twitter in general, where people are like, I've even seen tweets where it's like, I'm super rich and this is what web development has given me, or this is what just development in general has given me. And it's sort of like, yeah, but you're not showing the full picture, where you made a bunch of money, but you could be on call all the time or whatever. And it kind of goes against, actually, let me ask you this. We've asked this question, or we've brought up this topic or this concept on our show where, oh, oh, okay. Just to let you know, everybody, I did not make any, I don't know if anyone heard that, but Alexa let me know that I did not make any requests in the last couple minutes, but I can look on the Alexa app in case I want to go back via the privacy settings or something like that. Just to let everybody know. AI at work. Hopefully that person that works on that's on call so they can fix that. Anyway, but no, the one concept we talked about was are you a web developer or are you developing for a living kind of thing, where I can't remember the exact wording we used, but it's is your identity that you are a developer, that you're being a web developer, or are you just doing it to make money to fund your lifestyle? And it almost sounds like you kind of can't, you have to just be a developer 100% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's 100% of the time, but yeah, it's not a 50-50 balance split, in my opinion. I think the reason that the salaries are so high is because there's a lot demanded from you, and you are 100% correct that a lot of people make it out to be this perfect job, when really there's a lot of challenges. And one of those challenges is that you have to strike that work-life balance that works for you. That's not going to be 50-50 most of the time, especially when you're starting out, right? Again, as you get more senior and as you start to understand your field really well, it can get to that point. And you could be making that crazy salary. So maybe some of those people are probably most of those people are telling the truth, but they have to go through a lot of shit to get there. And that's,
and it gets sugar coated for social media, like everything, or most things, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing is perfect. Web development is not perfect in any way, but it is a real way to earn a significant amount of money. But expect you're going to have to work for it.
It's definitely one of the bigger struggles I have, because I do a lot of stuff on my off time, and it's I like to schedule things, but it's if I'm in this position where I'm on call, then I don't want to schedule anything. And I actually kind of think this is how people fall off the map. When, you have a friend or something and he just falls off the map. Not that they're always developers, but it's they fall into their role of whatever it is, whatever their job is. And then it's just I better not make, in their mind, in my mind, it's I better not make any plans ever, because what if someone calls me? What if I don't pick up the phone? What if I don't see that text message? I may as well just be available all the time. It's like, how could I go skiing? Because, like, what am I supposed to do? Have a laptop strapped, like, to my back? Like, what am I supposed to do?
So, again, in a typical developer role, you're not going to be on call all the time, especially as a junior developer. It's just not going to happen. Like, the senior architect or the senior engineer might split that responsibility with someone because the junior is not going to be able to help in this situation anyway. So, but anyway, like, the fact it's not only about the on-call part, it's about that extra learning part, right? Like if you're not investing that time into learning a little bit more outside of the job, it's going to be more difficult for you to get out of the comfort zone. That's the key here, right? It's not only about the on-call. And I get what you're saying with the like always being anxious and worried about taking a vacation. But again, there are systems, very intentional systems in place so that when someone's out, like we had our lead developer essentially on the entire project out for paternity leave for 3 months. Right. And we'd never contacted them once in that time because there was he wrote a document about all of his responsibilities. He had a week of, training other people on the job. And then, we had emergencies happen. The site went down. Like there were stuff that happened that he could have come in and helped, but we didn't need that because there's systems in place for that.
Right.
Okay. So the vacation is a vacation. You shouldn't have to bring your laptop on your back to be able to go skiing. Like that's
while you're skiing down the hill.
Yeah. If you're in that situation, yeah, you're in a toxic work environment. That's just you're in a toxic work environment. You need to get out of there. You need to plow through it. Get as much as you can from it and get the hell out of there as soon as possible because you're going to burn out. Because there should be a very clear separation between work and office. And there should be, if you're on call, deliberately on call. And you're either getting paid a significant amount because of your role, or you're getting paid those hourly wages or something like that for the on-call time. Okay, next tip is communicate often. This is really important. For a junior developer, especially starting out, the way that people see you and the way that you get noticed in the team is by your communication. So just responding to messages, just being consistent responding to messages. I'm not saying respond immediately. If you're in deep work, turn off your notifications and work. But when you get out and you have that time set for just, drinking a coffee, respond to some messages. Respond to your Jira tickets. Respond. Because the more people see you, the more they'll trust you. The biggest thing that I've noticed is like trust builds really quickly when you have a clear line of communication. It's not about how great of a developer you are. It's not about that you can do this 10 times faster. If you're consistently reporting on the issue that you're solving and you have a great, a communication line to the stakeholders and that you're letting them know what's going on, you're going to be trusted to do more and more really quickly. Ask questions and then write down answers. So writing down answers can be something in a knowledge base, which would be great, or it can be personal in your own notebook, whatever. But just so that you don't have to ask questions more than twice, just make sure that you write down the answers, especially to the ones that you're going to have to ask more times.
Oh, one other thing too I want to ask or add there is that because you're not versed in something, obviously, you don't want to keep asking the person the same question. But if you write down the answer, like you write down the question you asked and then you write down the answer, if something is close or you think is close and you might get the same answer, I open up with like, hey, I'm not sure if this is the same answer you gave me before, like about this, and I let them know that like I'm acknowledging that I might be asking the same question, but I'm so green with whatever it is that I'm not actually sure if the question's the same. And so I mean, I get told off sometimes, but but it does soften the blow. It at least lets them know that I'm not just being negligent and not writing down the answer. It's just that I don't know if it's the same thing.
What's crazy, Matt, is that I feel like you were definitely in a toxic work environment because all your story, like I've never been told off for asking a question, not once in my entire life of any developer that I've ever talked to I've been told that like, that's a stupid question, any negativity at all. Like not even once. The only thing that I've had is like no responses. That's the only thing. That's the worst that's happened to me. There's
I mean,
no
I've never
response.
been in like a professional developer role in terms of like in a corporate environment. But like, and some of my answers are not about the corporate environment. Some of them are about like a more of a blue collar position as well. Working with my hands and stuff. But it's like all these, like I've definitely been told off like in multiple jobs, in multiple things. And then I just don't give a fuck right after.
Yeah.
It's really bad. It's pretty rugged. Like it's literally, there's been times where I'm like, oh, hey, like, I'm just making this up. It's like, hey, like, where are the brooms at? And it's like, I think all the staff know where the brooms are. It's like, oh, okay. Well, it's not getting sweep then. I just walk away. And then that's it. And then it becomes a problem. You know what I mean? It's like, once it's toxic, now I'm toxic. It's not good. I've had some good jobs. I've had some bad jobs, but also I've had like good jobs and good environments with like one or two bad people. It's kind of like in school where you have some bad friggin' teachers, you know, whatever.
Yep. That's why I always say in school or in university, bad teachers are actually teaching you for the workplace, because it's going to happen. You're going to have a bad boss. You're going to have that. Like I've been very lucky. I want to clarify. Like I've had weird situations at work. Like I've definitely had some weird situations with clients. I've had some weird situations, and I've had some confrontational moments with new employees and stuff like that. But in terms of my direct reports, my managers, I've been very lucky in the web development industry. And now I worked in the restaurant. That was a whole different can of worms. There was a lot of yelling there and screaming, but so I don't know if that just taught me to not care about it anymore or something, but regardless, very lucky. But yeah, I feel like you definitely had some toxic relationships at work. And that's definitely hitting you, but, it's not all bad. Like asking questions usually does not have an aggressive response. It either has a good response, a clear response, or no response at all, which sucks. I've
definitely like verbatim been told like, hey, don't bother me in like a work chat. And I'm just like, oh, hey, like, I don't know. How do I'm just making this up. It's like, oh, hey, how do I install this? And I've asked the specialist in that area, and it's like, hey, don't bother me. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess it's being installed incorrectly. And it absolutely was. It was absolutely installed incorrectly right after that.
They have to go out of their way to tell you that too. Like they could have just left you on red. Like they could have, like there's just like they could have just left it, but they had to be a dick. Like they had to be a dick. So that's bonkers to me. Like that is insane for a technical professional to do that. That means that either they're a toxic person or the environment around them is extremely toxic, and that's just how everyone treats each other, which sucks. Again, if you're in this situation, get as much out of it as you can and get the hell out of there.
I will say this is like, I think in all my jobs, I don't think it was a toxic work environment. It's definitely like toxic isolated cases that like my brain has like seared into my memory.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, let's say I have like 10 shifts. It's like 1 or 2 of my shifts have like 2 minutes total of a really toxic thing. And I don't remember anything about those 10 shifts, but I remember those 2 really friggin' weird or really toxic in engagements. So that I'm just like, well, staying away from that person or, you know, whatever.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's fire off these other tips because we're already at 1 hour and 20 minutes, everyone. Okay.
That's what I'm cutting you off right now.
Nope.
No, I'm just kidding.
Take ownership. This one is particularly useful for advancing in the company. When you first start off and you start looking at the backlog of tasks, and a backlog is usually something that's in Jira of stuff that they want to get done, essentially stuff that they just don't have the people or they haven't assigned to anyone or whatever. It's something that the business team usually asks for and needs to be done at some point in the future sprint. If you can find a task there that you think you can do, and again, step out of your comfort zone a little bit here, you can go to your project manager, you can go to your tech lead, you can go to another developer and be like, hey, I want to take this task on, and go through and talk to the stakeholders. So who reported that task? Reach out to them. Ask them for clarification on something and take that task and take it from start to finish to completion, right? Now, I'm not saying alone. I'm not saying you have to just like silo yourself and do this. I'm saying communicate as you're doing it because it shows that you're taking ownership of a task and you're doing whatever it takes to get it done. And that kind of mentality is really valuable in a development environment because a lot of times there's some developers that'll just kind of sit back and wait for tasks to be assigned to them, do the task, don't talk to anyone, do the task, submit it, then have a bunch of feedback because they didn't clarify anything. They just did their best foot forward and that's it. And then they have to do a bunch of iterations without speaking it to anyone. And then eventually, 3 weeks down the line, it gets done. Now, that's going to happen. You're going to have that kind of situation happen to you. That's fine. But if you can step ahead of that a little bit and make sure that you understand the task top to bottom and have those conversations with maybe the management team or the stakeholders, then first of all, you're branching out of just development. So you're getting noticed and you're becoming a more valuable member of the team because you're able to, without as much hand holding and without as much back and forth, get a project done and delivered. Or not even a project, sorry, a task. A project would be probably too much to ask initially. So try to think that way a little bit. Try to find that task that really helps you and then establish that process. So, you're going to be handed more responsibilities. You're going to be handed more complex things down the line and embrace that. Again, outside of the comfort zone a little bit. Own up to mistakes. This is a big one. No one likes to admit that they're wrong. No one likes to admit that they screwed up, but you're a junior developer. You're going to drop a table or something like that. And dropping table, by that, I mean like an SQL table, like a database table. You're going to accidentally write something in SQL and it's going to destroy the entire database, right? That's going to happen. There might be some other, like not as extreme, but it might happen. Like that is a very common issue with junior developers, right? If you own up to that mistake in the stand-up or whatever, the consequences are probably going to be nothing. It's going to be a learning example. It's going to be like, hey, we're just going to revert back to the backup because this happens all the time. If you don't own up to that, if you're just like, oh, you know what, I was following this guy's recommendation and like it was actually him or them or whatever. If you start pointing fingers around you, that's something that you clearly screwed up. That's going to look really bad right off the bat. It's not a big deal to screw up. I promise you it's going to happen. And I promise you it's not that big of a deal. Okay. Obviously, a lot of times you want to limit your screw ups to like the development environment and the pre-prod environment. But even in production, it's going to happen. Like sometimes something will go down. I've done it. I've taken down the site. Like in the last 3 months, I've taken down the site myself. My own personal mistake. I wrote to all the stakeholders what happened. I gave them a retrospective of what happened. I owned up to it, I promise. And nothing, no negative feedback was put on there. People were more than happy to hear that. It's not a big deal to own up to your mistakes as long as you own up to them.
No negative feedback until you got to me. And then I sent you a message and said, just fix it. Don't bother me.
Yeah. You're that toxic person in our relationship. I got it. It makes sense. Everything makes sense now.
That's a joke, everybody. Let's calm it down. Yeah.
Okay. Own up to your mistakes. That's a clear one. Suggest solutions. So as a junior developer, you might be really hesitant to like put your foot forward and suggest something that you think that, the seniors will obviously know. But the reality is you're learning development at a different time than they are. So for instance, there's a new project coming up that's an internal tool for like managing order numbers, whatever. People need to have visibility into what order numbers are being placed at what time, a little dashboard. Everyone has been using Angular forever. Everyone on the team is big on Angular. It's okay to mention, hey, maybe we should try React. Maybe we should try Svelte for this. It's a new framework coming out. It's a new framework coming up. It's faster, X and X and X. Talk about it. Doesn't mean that they're going to accept it, but it's good to kind of get your foot in there. It's good to have those conversations. It's good to be that kind of person that is okay with suggesting something new, because when it comes time to it, when you start to develop more of a rapport, when you start to develop more seniority, you're more likely going to be the one that they lean on to choose new technologies because you already know about them. You've talked about them many times. And then you can start bringing in maybe Svelte into your work environment or React, stuff that you actually like to do. If you just stay silent and conform to whatever everyone says, you're going to be stuck working with older technologies, but you're just not going to be relied on as much. Establish work-life balance that works for you. Again, Matt mentioned it before. Like, is it possible to have perfect 50-50 balance? Probably not. When you're first starting out, you need to put that extra effort in to try to kind of get out of the first initial role as quickly as possible, in my opinion. You want to make sure that you establish as much knowledge as you can, because as you start interviewing for the more senior roles that are like high 3-figure salaries, if that's your goal, the questions they're going to be asking you is, what tech did you work on? What did you do? And if you didn't step outside your comfort zone, then you're probably going to be siloed into whatever tech was presented to you. But if you did and you learned and you grew and you made mistakes and you went out of your way to learn more stuff, you're going to have a lot more to say in that question during the interview. Right? So just think about it like that. It's about the next part. It's about the next phase. It's really important to have that growth mindset in this early stage. And it sucks sometimes because, again, you might have to sacrifice some of your work life balance. You might have to, spend that extra 3 hours studying code instead of watching Netflix. But it is a part of it. Now, having said that, again, if you do that every day, if you spend 8 hours or 10 hours at work and then 8 hours learning code, you're going to burn out and it's going to be good for no one. You need to figure out the signals that your body's telling you when you've had too much. You need to set days when you don't have anything after 5, when you don't do studying. You need to give yourself weekends. You need to give yourself holidays. You need to have that work-life balance. It's just, unfortunately, probably not going to be that 50-50 that you would want. That's all I'm saying.
The one thing, too, when you were saying, like, listen to your body, is that's a really challenging thing for me as well, is I will, like, dig in on something. And it doesn't even matter whether it's a hobby or not. And what ends up happening to me is I will dig in and be like, nope, like I'm not, leaving, or I'm not stopping doing this until I, hit a certain level of progress or complete this task or whatever it is. Again, it could be hobby or professional or whatever. And what ends up happening is if I do not reach that level of progress and I do not listen to the signals of my brain or whatever is telling me, then I eventually just go, all right, I guess I just can't do this. And then every time I approach that task, I approach it like I don't care. And then I just do a horrible job. And I was like, yep, just as expected. And I move on, which is probably not good. So don't do that.
Yeah, it is a tricky thing, but it's important to learn. Like Matt said, it can debilitate you. Like it can bring you down.
Like I've been trying to learn to golf lately and I was like progressing like normal. And now I've lost everything I learned the whole season because I just like hit a wall, did not progress at the level I wanted. And this is leisurely. Like, remember this. And I'm not even trying to be PGA Tour. I'm just trying to like play consistently. And I like hit a wall and now I just can't play. Basically, I basically just can't play because I'm just useless. I go up and I'm like, oh, well, that was bad. It went in the water. Oh, well, whatever. Take a drop. Oh, look, I messed it up again. And that's like just and that's not good. Like I do that with everything and it's not good. But
and it's a mental thing. And golf is a very, very mental sport. And like development can be too. Like you can get stuck on a problem and it can grind you down. It can. So that's something that you have to work on. Like I'm not saying you, Matt, I'm saying everyone out there and myself included. Like it sometimes grinds me down too. It's just one of those things where it's going to be part of it. Like debugging is 50% of your job. Debugging code. Yeah. That's like in these big projects, that's something I didn't mention actually, and I should have in the differences, but you're going to be doing a lot of freaking debugging and it's annoying and it's frustrating and you need to be able to mentally get past that. And it is really a mental thing and you need to be able to know when to step back and you need to be able to know when to go in. And like, that's where like, again, the reason that developers are paid so much as you move up levels is they're able to kind of balance these things. They're able to suggest solutions. They're able to implement a feature. They're able to take ownership of something. They're able to do this kind of stuff and get through the mental barriers and finish a project. Because all of it, like, it's just challenge after challenge after challenge as you go through it. Like, it's almost never a smooth sailing, no matter how well prepared you are. And like, yeah, the top paid developers are able to like just put their head down, grind through it and answer all the questions and get through all the debugging bullshit. And that's it. And it's important to learn that early on, I think. Otherwise you're going to have, it's going to be a kind of a rude awakening. And the last thing here, last tip is time block your calendar. We already mentioned that, where if you want to do some deep work, time block it in your calendar. And then you can actually get some work done without getting contacted constantly to, I don't know, change a logo here or ask what the status of a project is, even though you put it in the Jira ticket, and all the other frustrating things that can happen and that can distract you in a non-urgent sense, I should say.
Sound advice, sound tips and tricks. But I think that concludes the episode, unless you have anything else to add, Mike.
It does. That's it. That's your little breakdown of your first junior developer job, and I hope you get it. I hope you get through it. It's not, I maybe made it out to seem difficult. I hope I did not scare anyone off, but
it scared me off. I'm out of here.
That's good. Yeah. Fantastic. But it is, I wanted to be really realistic about it. But I also want to say that you can do it 100%. It's not rocket science. It's not that hard. It is a lot of office politics and management and stuff like that, and you can get through it.
All right. And with that, if you like episodes like this and you want to support the show, you can go check us out on that Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML all the things. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons, Ryan Gatchell from Blue Black Digital and blueblackdigital.com, Chris from Self-Made Web Designer and selfmadewebdesigner.com, Tim from The Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, DL Ford from dlford.io, Viv #9blockmedia and 9blockmedia.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Michael Curie from MC Web Studio via mcwebstudio.ca, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Jeff from Twitter via @thejeffmchale, Fire Ant Season via fireantseason.com, and a new one this week, Watoto Coding. So that's Watoto Coding via watotocoding.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you're listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media. On Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.